So Francis and I were in Orlando this week. Probably better there than here. But it was kind of a whirlwind tour. We went to Universal Studios one day, and for those who are interested, we went to the Harry Potter exhibit, which was pretty good. Then one of our members here at Good Shepherd, Jim Valenti, invited us to watch the weather satellite be launched into space, and we were at the Kennedy Space Center one day, which was truly awesome. And then on Friday, we were at Epcot all day. But those 3 days, one of the things that struck me is how many experiences are now simulations. Simulations. Rides and experiences where you're seated somewhere and the ride, you're in front of a big screen, but you're jolted. It seems like you're moving. It seems like you're moving at warp speed or at a high altitude. Gives you the sense that you're in the midst of something incredibly dangerous. And let's just say I do not do well with these rides. I do not do well at all. They give me an instant headache. I don't even need to go in. I can just feel as I'm waiting in line that my temperature is rising, my heartbeat is going up, I'm starting to sweat, and it gets worse when I get actually into the seat. But my stomach feels it. Let's just say it's not good for me to have eaten before going on such rides. And I've learned that the best strategy, ultimately, if I want to be with my family, is still to go on the ride, but I've learned that I simply close my eyes and wait it out. And in some sense, by closing my eyes, I don't have to face how difficult this experience is for me, but I'm really pretending. I'm pretending to some level I'm not on this ride. And often it works. But let me just say, reality is often hard enough to face in this life. We don't need to simulate it to realize reality is sometimes difficult. You know, Peter had been invited to on the ride of his life, picked out by Jesus to follow, granted incredible access to Jesus, and Peter jumped on board. And he hung close to Jesus for quite some time. What an incredible privilege it must have been to have so much face-to-face contact with Jesus where you could ask him any question under the sun, things we don't even have access to. He certainly would have been able to ask him anything under the sun. He would have had day-to-day opportunity to observe the way he interacted with others. He would have had a sense of the way Jesus' mannerisms, saw the way he prayed, saw the way he confronted someone new or someone who was different. We would have seen how Jesus went about that process. You know, the old saying goes, if you have a rabbi and you're his student, you stay so close that you catch the dust off the rabbi's feet. And there's no doubt that Peter caught a lot of Jesus' dust. He was part of the inner circle of the 12 disciples. There was an inner circle of 3. And he would have seen so many of the miracles. He would have seen some dramatic God moments like on the Mount of Transfiguration. He would have seen healing up close and personal, including one of Peter's own family members. He experienced Jesus walking on water, and actually we know that even though he didn't fully succeed, at least Peter had the courage to step out of the boat. He was bold. He was bold, as we learned this morning once more. He was willing to take the first step, often before the rest of the disciples. He was the one who was proclaiming allegiance to the very, very end. Even if everyone else turns away, I'll never, ever deny you, Jesus, is what he said. And as I read the text today, I'm sure Peter really would have wished he was going through a simulation and not a reality. As we've been talking about, this Lent reality came swooping in with an incredible force. It came quickly. After celebrating the Passover meal, Jesus went out to the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. We remember that's where he prayed, where he tried to focus, tried to build up his courage, and then the temple guard showed up, arrested him. All the disciples fled except for one, Peter. Peter followed, perhaps at a distance, but he followed, knew where they were taking him. They went across the Kidron Valley up to a place called Galicantu, which Pastor Ted talked about last week in Sunday school. the residence of the high priest. And there, in the middle of the night, all the ruling leaders of the day had gathered. They were up to something. And Jesus is taken inside, set in the midst of these leaders in this group, and he's put on trial. And you could say it's a mock trial, or it's a mockery, if you will. Maybe it's not a formal trial. But Peter stays outside in the courtyard, and he tries not to draw too much attention to himself. He sits by this fire with the other guards. And it's kind of symbolic in my mind that here is the ultimate insider in Peter. Now he's outside, just about to be put on trial himself. And what I want to say is it's probably not a legitimate trial that Jesus actually went through there, because it really violated almost all the rules of the day. There was to be no trial on Passover, no trial on Shabbat. There was to be no trials at night. They were very, very clear that any testimony of witnesses had to be in complete alignment, and you always held a trial in the official court. You never held it in someone's home. Something's kind of fishy going on here. What's pretty clear is there's malicious intent. And Jesus is surrounded by malicious intent as false witnesses seem out to get him. They go to great efforts to silence him. It's really just an interrogation, or some say a strategy session, to decide what these leaders are ultimately going to present to Pontius Pilate, the person who had supreme authority. But it reveals, as I read it, human ugliness. Because you realize these well-respected people in society, they are the ones who end up spitting on him, cursing him, striking him with a fist, slapping him on the face, turning him over to soldiers to beat him. But how often in this life do the people of our world turn to violence and turn to trying to control people? Meanwhile, while Jesus is being victimized inside, Peter's out in the courtyard. He's outside, doing very little, just maybe warming himself by the soldiers, trying to keep quiet. A maid comes up to him and says, "You're one of that man's followers, the one inside. You're one of his followers." And there's a Greek phrase that says, it's called arneomai, which means act entirely unlike yourself. It means pretend. And Peter pretends to be somebody else. "I don't know him," he says. "I do not know him." Peter moves further away, symbolically and literally. He moves further out of the courtyard, further away from the fire. And another person comes up to him again and questions him. "Surely you're one of his followers." Or Naomai, he pretends again to be somebody else. And a third time, one comes up to him, and it's getting more and more intense, because it starts to draw the attention of the whole crowd. This man is a follower of Jesus. This man is a follower of his ways. He's one of them. He's one of them. They point the finger at him. And Arneomai once more Peter protests. He curses. "I don't know him. I don't know him." And with that, the cock crowed for the second time, just as Jesus predicted. And in that moment, what happens is Peter simply lets Jesus be a victim, lets him just suffer inside on his own, and he runs away and does nothing. And perhaps Peter wanted to just simply pretend that this whole ride with Jesus had just been a simulation in the first place, that it actually wasn't reality. But Peter disappears from the story. He disappears heartbroken, maybe sick to his stomach, but he gets out of there, creates distance. There are only two places in the New Testament where a charcoal fire is mentioned. One of them is here in the courtyard, and the other is on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's John 21. John 21. After running away, Peter disappears. Presumably, he heads back home to Galilee. And he announces one day, I'm going fishing. And it didn't mean he was going on vacation. I think what it means is he's going back to who he used to be. Maybe who he was supposed to be a fisherman. Maybe he's saying it really wasn't worth the effort of following Jesus in the first place. But then there came Some surprising news out down in Jerusalem. On an Easter morning, there's an angel standing by an empty tomb. And the angel announces to the women, this Jesus is not dead, but he lives. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he goes before you into Galilee. There you will see him. And that's what happened. In John 21, the disciples had been fishing all night. They had caught nothing. And suddenly they see a figure on the shore, and the figure calls out to them, cast your net to the other side. And a lot of us know what happens next. They had this miraculous catch of fish, 153 in all, 153 more than I ever catch. But Peter shouts, it's the Lord, it's the Lord. And he jumps into the water and he swims to the shore, and there is a charcoal fire, and there Jesus prepares breakfast for them. And I like to think that in the quietness of the moment, Jesus pulls Peter to the side and has a private conversation with him. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And 3 times Peter is forced to say it once more, I do love you. And he confesses his loyalty to him 3 times, in a sense to make up for the 3 denials. And Jesus goes on one step further. What Jesus says to him is, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. Carry on my mission. Make it reality in this world. And I think the beauty of the story is there's only one person that story could have been told from. Peter is the one who told the story. Peter is the one who passed the story on to other people. And I think that is precious to us. He is the one who passed on the story of his own failure in a tough moment, his own denial. And in doing so, it's freeing. Because in doing so, he says, if you think you individually have betrayed Jesus, if you think you've fallen short or committed some horrible sin, if you think you are not worthy to follow Jesus, remember what I did, is what Peter was saying. I slipped and I fell. And then Peter was able to say, yet Jesus never stopped loving me. He gave me a new chance. He never stopped loving me. And what he would be confessing to the people around him is, all you have to do is open your heart and receive that love and realize you have an important mission in this world. He says to us, I think, receive that message of love, receive that message of forgiveness, and then don't stop there. Go out and share it with others. Because as we share that with other people, you realize you and I, we bring healing and hope, and we bring a reality that this world and the people around us desperately needs to see and experience. Amen.